You've heard me say several times before that I tend to think we oftentimes have heard these stories so often that we're accustomed to them and they don't shatter us maybe the way they ought to. And I tend to think this is one of those stories, this event in the life of Jesus. We have all of the images of God here: light, sun, brightness. And when we look at the Hebrew Scriptures, all of those events, all of those words summon fear. They show the inaccessibility of God, not God's nearness. In fact, we have the hymn that God lives in light inaccessible. It would seem under normal circumstances that if I went up to a mountain and suddenly the person next to me started emitting light like the sun, I would not be drawn to that person. I would run the other way as quickly as I could. And yet, the apostles are drawn. Peter, it is good for us to be here. Let us stay here forever, at least until the bright cloud comes down and they hear the other voice of God. It makes me wonder, why were they drawn? And it, at least for me, gives me an insight, I think, into what Transfiguration is all about. The Transfiguration is not somehow Jesus changing into God. It is not somehow a human being becoming God. It's the acknowledgement that this same human flesh and blood Jesus, whom you touched, whom you conversed with, whom you even maybe argued with, is now showing who he also is. Not something added to that person of Jesus, but a revelation of what he has always been. This very human Jesus is indeed the Son of God. And I think that that might be important because it might tell us something about how we come to faith. If we only hear about the light, the sun, the clouds, the thunder, the mountaintop, it can be a terribly fearful thing. Think of Old Testament allusions, especially as many of us have been reading during the weeks up till now, the story of Exodus, where Moses sees God on Mount Sinai, and his face becomes so white that he frightens all of the Israelites, and he has to wear a veil over his face to be able to speak to his friends. God, who seems to be so separated from us that it's impossible to get to him. And once we see him, we will die. Rather, we first see the human Jesus. We first see the friend. We first see the teacher. And we realize that the teacher, because of his concern for us, has become the master. And it's only then that we understand who he really is, and it's no longer fearful. We're drawn to him, first in his humanity, and then in his divinity. I was going to say we're drawn to him like flies to a bug light, but that didn't really seem to be a really good image. But notice what happens then. Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let us stay here forever. Suddenly, the desire to stay keeps us from doing what we ought to be doing. And Jesus touches them and says, "Fear not, but let us now go down from the mountain." And the way I read that, the way I hear that, means that we who have been able to catch a glimpse of who Christ is, the apostles who were able to catch a glimpse of that light, now needed to be a light for others. That the glimpse that they received of Christ's divinity now became their mission, to share that glory with others. And I tend to think that light, that mission, that catching a glimpse of Christ and needing to do something about it might be what we are all about today. And again, I don't want to say that you're drawn to this place as bugs to a lamp. I don't want to use that image. But I do think what we need first to see, always, is the humanity of the church. The concern that the church has for others. The concern we as members of the church show to the world. It is first, I believe, in our humanity that people begin to approach the mountain. And it is then that we show who Christ really is, that we show Christ's divinity, that we show our own faith in Christ as the Son of the living God, as brightness itself, brightness that is not fearful, but that attracts. And then we who come are attracted. I'm not quite sure we want to stay here forever, but that's another story. We are called then to move out, to share that light with one another, to be wisdom to our sisters and brothers, to be Christ's healing to our sisters and brothers, to be that light which enlightens the darkness of our world. And so we now, who have seen the light of Christ, are called to be light to one another. And I would like to end the homily right here, but sadly, I can't. Because in our day and age, light has gotten again another meaning. 72 years ago today, a bright light flashed on Hiroshima. And suddenly the beautiful image of light has become an anti-image. An image that does not speak of concern, an image that does not speak of peace, an image that does not speak of building up, but that bright light has become an image of destruction. And so, interestingly, this feast of the Transfiguration, this feast of light, this day, the 6th of August, becomes sadly also an anti-symbol, an anti-image, an image where light does not draw us, but repels us. And perhaps we in our generation need to live in that contradiction. Light being of God, light being demonic, light which draws us, light which repels us, light which shows us the concern and love of God, and light that shows the destruction of human hearts. There's no way I am going to be able in a homily or for the rest of my life bring those two together. And maybe I ought not try. So we celebrate today a feast of light, a feast of understanding, a feast of mission to share that light with one another. But sadly, as we share that light with one another, let us also remember the anti-image, the image, sadly, of destruction, and pray that that image will one day be dispelled, where light one day will only mean peace, love, and the presence of God among us.